And yes, we are live. I'm here with my new friend Justin. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you today?
Great to finally meet you face to face over the airwaves or whatever this is. That's what they used to call it, the airwaves.
Right, right.
But yeah, so we've been interacting a little bit on Twitter where we met, thanks to Greg. My name is Greg. Shout out to Greg. Hope you're feeling better. Had a bit of a burn incident. Not sure what happened. Maybe a cooking. I'm imagining it was like a cooking accident. I don't know. But hopefully you're doing well, but brother, our prayers for you. And hopefully I'm going to have Greg on the show soonish. We're trying to work that out so he can come on. He may be putting together his own podcast. But this is all about you. So I
Oh,
want to find out about you. Talk us through the whole journey. I always ask my guests to go right back to early childhood, your first impressions about religion and stuff like that, philosophy, and how were you raised, and how did you end up where you are today? I can see from your Twitter handle you've got a story to tell. But before getting into the meat and potatoes of the story, just to walk us through the whole faith journey in Cole's Notes version, please.
sure, you bet. Yeah, so I was in our culture, I was what's called born under the covenant or born in the covenant. So a lifelong member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and born out in frigid Minnesota, but my parents were smart enough to move us down to Colorado where we get snow, but also get some sunshine and that kind of stuff when I was very, very young. So grew up most of my life in Colorado. And
My sister lives there.
yeah,
I've been to Boulder.
oh, really?
Flew into
Okay, yeah.
flew into Denver and then went to see my sister in Boulder. Can't say I liked Boulder. Too pristine and clean and white for my taste. But
Gotcha, gotcha.
where
Yeah,
were
it's a
you?
beautiful
Where were you
place.
guys?
It's a good place to go hiking, but
Yeah.
I don't think I would live there either. So
Where were you? Like you near Denver or?
yes, we were in Golden, Colorado is where
Oh
I
yeah.
grew up. And
Okay.
so
Okay.
not too far for Boulder.
Yeah.
So same direction, away from Denver west, about 30, 35 minutes. And but we were in a little, it's our mailing address was Golden, but we were actually in a little place that was unincorporated. And I went to Arvada West High School and more consider myself from Arvada than Golden itself.
Okay.
So,
A
but we
lot
were
of
close enough
LDS
so
there?
whenever we say it again.
A lot of LDS there or not so much?
Yeah, pretty big population. Yeah,
Uh-uh.
there in the Denver metro and in Arvada and
Okay.
Golden, not so much, but they do have a couple buildings over there in Golden and some congregations and that kind of stuff. But so yeah, it was. I would say that as far as being LDS, outside of the Mormon corridor, which is Utah, Idaho, Arizona, being in Colorado is a pretty good place to be if you want to have a good support system as an LDS person. And so grew up in the church and I don't want to get too deep into childhood and that kind of stuff, but I guess the thing I would say is that my observation as I was growing up is that I was being taught a lot of things that weren't manifesting themselves in the reality of my life, right? And so as I got to be a teenager, had a lot of questions and grew up in a family in which questioning was encouraged, and and so kind of found myself on the outside looking in a little bit. I was the kid that would show up to church in green flip flops, and everybody else was wearing a suit and polishing their shoes and that kind of a thing. And so, um, but felt loved and supported and felt like it was a good place for me to be. It provided me a lot of social opportunities. Me and my friends were mostly we would go to activities to play basketball. The church had a basketball hoop, and so we were pretty happy about that and that kind of a thing. And so, um, and then, as I graduated, I started school a little bit young and graduated high school when I was 17. And so when I headed off to university, um, at that point, I wasn't what I would consider really an active member of the church. I still believed a lot of what I'd been taught growing up, but the difference between what I was observing and what I was being taught was causing a lot of dissonance for me, in terms of the hypocrisy that I was observing and that kind of stuff. And so stepped away for a little bit, but in our church, they ask all the young men to serve a service mission when we turn 19 years old. And so I was within a couple of years of that and thought, hey, like I should probably figure this out, right? Like if I'm going to go spend 2 years of my life, um, should probably take the time to like make a really good faith effort to understand what it is I'm being taught. And and so spent some time studying the scriptures. And for me, I developed a really strong testimony, what we call a testimony. I don't know what you guys call it in Catholicism, but about the reality that there might be some additions to the canon that need to be made and that teach us truth, right? And so I became willing to go out and serve a mission for the church, and was called to Seoul, South Korea, and got out on that mission. And fortunately or unfortunately, I guess depending on how you look at it, that didn't go all that well. Had a lot of health problems, and was only out for about 4 months, and then had some really challenging experiences while I was out there, and came back home. And but at that point, because of the conversion I had, I felt like I still wanted to be a part of the church. And so from there forward, I mean, the fast and easy way to tell the story is simply to say that I've really just been trying to find my place inside of this spiritual, and now what I know to be corporate body, right? Like, and as I continue to ask questions, there have been a lot of really amazing experiences, and a lot of wonderful opportunities to minister and to be ministered to, and to see what I consider to be, miraculous experiences, but also to bump up and to make contact with parts of the church that I didn't even know existed, that don't seem to appreciate my questioning nature all that much. So that's sort of the long and short of it.
I've been interviewing a few LDS, or Mormons, as I like to call them colloquially,
Sure.
recently, and I think I alluded to the fact on Twitter, and I private message to you that it's kind of like a pet peeve of mine. It's just like the whole worldview aggravates me. But it's the metaphysics. It's the metaphysics that bothers me, and it's just really challenging, and I get annoyed. But I'll try to be I'll try to be polite as always. But what do you think about that side, the philosophical metaphysical side of the foundations of what the LDS teaches? Have you looked into it at all? Is that something that you're inclined to dig into?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and so, I mean, I think the story behind, Mormonism, I know, like, I'm especially not supposed to call it that, because our most current prophet has told us that we give a victory to Satan when we use that term.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, which again,
Oh.
but it's okay. I don't like, other people use it, and I actually don't mind using it either. I think there's a backstory there that we might want to get into a little bit if we have time, but if not, I think, to answer your question, the story of Mormonism is really a fascinating one, because it really starts with something metaphysical and supernatural, which is a visitation, apparently, to a young boy out in a grove of trees from a deity, or a couple deities, depending on which version of the story you read, right? And so, and then for me, what's really fascinating, or what are the practical implications of metaphysical manifestations, right, in this world? And so, you'll hear people talk about the first vision that Joseph Smith had, and that's a vision, right? And whether that happened in the physical realm or in the metaphysical realm, I think is up for debate. And there are people inside the church that want to debate this. It's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because either way, it's a rather remarkable occurrence, right? But what fascinates me is what are the sort of the practical, what's the practical fallout when people have metaphysical or philosophical experiences that lead them to literally change everything in their life. And in Joseph Smith's case, and being shot in a jail because of what happened, what he claims happened to him, right? And so, I mean, I just think it's very interesting, because so Joseph Smith's story should be every Mormon's story, right? Because Joseph, one of the crazy claims, right, that Joseph made was that man could speak to God, and not just Joseph, but any man could receive personal revelation and guide his or her own life through the revelation that he or she received. And yet, despite the fact that that's what Joseph claimed, in my opinion, we now exist inside of a church that has largely forfeited their right to receive revelation, and has given that over to this man, the prophet of the church, or the president of the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the new mantra is follow the prophet, right? Which I find neither doctrinal, right? In fact, I would consider it like a very problematic belief, to hand over your sovereignty and follow another man, when Joseph taught us that we have access to revelation directly from the source himself or itself or herself, or however you want to frame whatever you believe God is, right?
Yeah, well, I think the Mormons, sorry, the LDS Church has always taught, and when I say church, I mean that very loosely, but I think the LDS teach that God is a man, right? Not a woman, not a
Sure.
child, not an it or a they them. It's a man, right? So that's one of my problems with the metaphysics. And when I say metaphysics, I'm talking about the stuff that we can know using pure reason without any faith-based beliefs whatsoever. I'm not talking about mystical, magical stuff like an encounter, a supernatural encounter. I'm talking about pure reason, like what the atheists are able to use their God-given brain to figure out that 1 + 1 = 2. That's the sort of level that I'm talking about philosophically when it comes to understanding who and what God is, the uncaused first cause. So that's where my problem is. It's not with the crazy stories of Mormonism, if you'll allow me to keep using that word because it's just a habit, bad habit. But
Sure.
seems to flow off the tongue better for whatever reason. But you know,
I mean, I'm interested, like, in terms of, because, and I think we talked about this a little bit on Twitter, but I don't know a lot about Catholic beliefs. But so you're right that in Mormonism, we do believe that God is. I mean, there's an old couplet, right, that you'll hear every once in a while is, as I'm gonna totally mess it up, of course, since we're live. But it's something along the lines of as God is, man once was. As God is, man may become, something along those lines, which sounds like it gives you some heartburn, right? What's the belief inside of Catholicism in terms of the nature of God?
yeah, well, it's God is pure spirit. He is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. He's purely actual. There's no potential. There's no composition, not even of essence and existence. God's essence is existence. He's the only being whose essence is existence. You and I are composed of essence and existence, and we're also composed of material stuff that's contingent. It's always changing. We are body and soul. Our soul is pure spirit, but our body is subject to change. And there's actually a question I have about my own faith, which I haven't figured out yet. I should look into it. I keep forgetting,
Mm-hmm.
but it has to do with it has to do with our soul. I don't quite understand if our soul is changeable or not. I don't understand that, but anyway, that's a footnote for myself to look it up later to figure that out. But
Yeah,
in any case,
yeah.
it's a mystery. Life is a mystery, love is a mystery, and our each human being is a profound mystery, a supernatural mystery, and the mind is not natural, it's supernatural. So it's very much, there's a mystical component obviously to monotheism and Christianity in particular, and especially Catholicism, which I see as the fullness of Christianity. But the nature of God can be understood largely, not comprehensively, but largely encountered and understood using just the pure reason without recourse to faith. I was an atheist for 25 years, and then I became a generic monotheist. I believed in the uncaused first cause, the first mover, the prime mover of philosophy, and
Mm-hmm.
I understood that is the God of monotheism, the classical theism. And my church actually teaches me. I discovered later when I joined Christianity and Catholicism, I found out later that the church has a series of dogmas. There are 426
Yeah,
listed, 426 dogmas listed in this book. And one of the first dogmas is that we can know using pure reason without recourse to faith that God exists just by looking at causality, the fact that things are contingent, they're all, cause and effect is one of the primary ways that we can come to understand. If you read the book of Romans in our Bible, and I think you've incorporated your Bible into your holy set of canon, right?
yes, yeah.
Um,
We follow the King James version of the Bible.
if you
Mm-hmm.
look at Romans 1, it talks about how we are without excuse if we don't deduce the creator from the creation. So there's this idea that the book of nature actually reveals God, not directly but indirectly by analogy. And if we think about causality, if we think about the contingent versus the necessary, we will come to understand
Yeah,
that God exists, and we're without excuse if we deny it. If we're an atheist, we are without excuse. So sadly, I put the LDS in the atheist materialist category, because or at least some sort of a pantheist or a polytheist thing. But it's not monotheism. It's not classical theism. That's my beef, and we'll dig into that maybe a little bit. But I wanted to, and you can respond to everything I've said, but I just wanted to mention that I've interviewed a guy, a funny guy. He's a Protestant Christian. His name is
Hmm.
Stephen Pinnaker, and he runs the
Okay.
the Mormon Book Club is his project, and he's obsessed with Mormonism because it saved his life. He was suicidally depressed, but his obsession with Mormonism, just how weird and strange it is, saved his life. So he's very grateful
Yeah.
to your community, and he loves you and your lovely people, and it's true. I do.
Yeah, that's really
I've never met a Mormon I didn't like and appreciate, and that
sure.
that didn't make me feel inadequate as a human being because you're such nice people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We hear that a lot. I mean, like as a Mormon, you hear that a lot. Like, every Mormon I've met is the nicest person I ever met.
Yeah.
And I like to say, from the ground up, to me, this is just my perspective. From the ground up, at that congregational level, there's nowhere I'd rather be than inside of a Mormon congregation. But the higher up the tree I get, and the more I
Uh,
realize that there's the corporate structure that sort of has, in my opinion, usurped authority and stepped in to act as the interface between civil society and the spiritual body. For me, that's where the problems sort of lie right now in my own
are
personal
you
journey.
alone in that, or
But
is there a group that you belong to, like a schism, sort of a branch that's branching off, or are you very much alone in this
no,
criticism?
no. I mean, you talk about my childhood. Like, the only thing, like, on every report card that I ever got was doesn't play well with others, and so I'm not a part of any group of any kind. But I would say that there's a growing dissatisfaction. Like, I mean, like, if you so it's funny because, like, when you're a Mormon, you're so immersed in the fishbowl, you don't realize that it's something that other people aren't paying attention to at all. But if you were a Mormon on Twitter this week, you would see that there's a huge um, uh, thing going on right now.
Oh,
And I don't want to get into the details too
okay.
much because it's about an issue that I don't understand very
Okay.
well.
Okay.
But what you see is that people continue to, so in my opinion, like, the problem is members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, members of the spiritual body
Yeah.
known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, believe that they're interfacing with a spiritual body. But in reality, if you go look at the articles of incorporation of the corporation based out of Utah, also known as the Church of Jesus Christ
Uh,
of Latter-day
uh,
Saints, what you'll learn is that that corporation has declared sort of unilaterally that they're going to act as the interface between civil society and the spiritual body. Members of the church don't understand this at all. They think that they would, when they go to see a bishop or a stake president, which are like our ecclesiastical leaders for a congregation, they think that they're going to see a shepherd who's going to help them with spiritual matters. What they really end up doing is going to see a middle manager inside of a corporation, right? And if anything comes up that makes them kind of like, they're going to go check with HR in Salt Lake, or they're going to go check with
uh,
legal in Salt Lake.
uh,
And all of a sudden, people who think that they're being shepherded or ministered to
uh,
are now being managed as a human resource inside of a corporation. And that's where this whole thing about LDS abuse comes in, right? Because when you're an abused individual who's been traumatized and you go thinking that you're going to a shepherd to be ministered to,
mm,
and you end up being treated like a human resource and you're interfacing with middle management, it's so there's a saying out there in the abuse world of, it's called the second wound. So the abuse is the first wound. The second wound is when you go to get help, and instead of receiving help, you get re-traumatized for various
oh,
reasons.
oh,
And so for me, a lot of like moving forward in my own research and in whatever else happens in my life is simply helping people understand that if you think that you're going to an ecclesiastical leader, in a sense you are, but in practicality, what you're really dealing with is middle management of a multinational global corporation that has $150 billion of assets, right? And the corporation's main job is to ensure that the corporation continues to exist, not
wow.
that you get the help and love and support and healing that you need,
Wow.
right?
So that's the real Satan that's crept in. It's not saying Mormon. It's it's the worldliness. It's the worldliness that's crept into this what you're describing, whether accurately or not. And I have no doubt because I mean, as you were speaking, I was picturing, the my own hierarchy in the Catholic Church. It is corrupt, and there are corrupt members in the hierarchy. And I've felt like a cog in the wheel when I've addressed issues which were supposed to be of a spiritual, supernatural nature, and I just got that same response, and it
Yeah,
was
I'm really
traumatizing.
interested. I was watching some of your past episodes just to prepare for this, and you talk, and I'm going to get this totally wrong, so just laugh and then try to correct me. because I may not even be able to describe it well enough for you to know what I'm talking about. But in the interview you did last week with the gentleman, you were talking about sort of like three levels of the
Yeah.
church, and there's like perfect, and then there's like I think you called it the military almost or something like
No,
that.
no,
But like,
no, no. I'll
explain that
jump
to
right
me.
in. I'll jump right in. Yeah, you got
Yeah.
the church triumphant, where Jesus, Mary, and Joseph are body and soul up in heaven. It's the perfect church, as the embodiment of the perfect church. And a lot of the saints, well, most of the saints haven't been reunited with their bodies yet, but they're there in spirit. Their soul is up in heaven. But on Judgment Day, when Christ comes again, they'll be reunited with their bodies. But that's the church triumphant. It's perfect already. But there's a purification taking place in the church suffering, which is called purgatory. You've heard
Mm,
about purgatory. That's where,
sure.
if I still have temporal punishment due to sin, I go and get purified, because nothing impure can stand before God, as it says in our scriptures. And then here below, it's the church militant, where we're battling the
Really?
spiritual battle, and we're deciding our fate. Are we going to end up going, because there's death, judgment, heaven, or hell. So we're here battling it out, battling the world, the flesh, and the devil, to see which ultimate destiny we're going to have. So it's the church militant, and here below there are wolves in sheep's clothing. There are weeds among the wheat, and Christ said, "Don't uproot the weeds; let them grow along with the wheat." And at the end, all
Right.
sorted out at the end. So there is corruption in not only the Catholic Church, but in every activity that humans are involved in. It might be your son's hockey league. There's corruption in
Sure.
there. I'm sorry to say, there's corruption in there. It might be minor. Hopefully, it is minor. Minor league corruption. But doctors, lawyers, judges. I mean, teachers. Everyone. No one is immune from concupiscence. This tendency to sin and to selfishness, and that's just the reality. So it's very naive for a Mormon, a Catholic, a Jehovah's Witness, or anyone else to say, well, no, my church is puritanical and only holy saints are allowed in. Like, no, like that's nonsense.
Yeah.
That's
So,
nonsense.
so from a Catholic perspective, because so here's, I mean, this is, I'd love to have this conversation with somebody who's not inside of my church, because
Yeah,
as I talk to people, I often get the argument of, Justin, you are out of your lane in trying to address the
right,
problems that you're
right,
trying to address.
right.
Inside of Catholicism, when you are in that church militant and you see corruption, and using logic and reason, which I think I really like about Catholicism, like what is the duty of a Catholic in terms of addressing corruption inside of the church?
Well,
Is there a role?
yeah, I have a very, very cautious approach to that, which is like, I think that it could do more harm than good. So maybe you're not going to like my answer, but I think it does more harm than good to go around airing the dirty laundry. I admit openly the church is corrupt, but I'm not going to go and say this particular priest, he's a bad guy for this reason or that reason. I sort of like airing the dirty laundry. And even if it's true, even if it's like this guy's convicted and whatever, as a pedophile or whatever it might be, I'm not in favor of spreading that kind of story within society. Not only because I want to protect the reputation of the church. That's not it. It's about respect for the human individual, and we don't know the heart. We can't judge the heart. So I'm very disappointed in some of the people that I've met in the Catholic hierarchy. Okay, some of them,
Mm-hmm.
and but I'm not going to make a spectacle of it, and I'm just going to pray for them quietly and hope for their conversion, hope and pray for their true and lasting conversion, because I know that I myself, there but for the grace of God go I. I'm eminently selfish. I'm eminently corruptible, and it just so happens I don't have that power. I'm not in a position of power, but if I did, God help me, and God help those under me. So yeah, I'm very, very, very cautious. I don't want to judge too quickly, too rashly, and I know that, woe to those who call evil good and call good evil. So I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
sugarcoat the bad stuff that people are doing, that Catholics in the hierarchy are doing. There are wolves in sheep's clothing, right? But I'm just very cautious about it. And there are Catholics that are err on the other side, and they're quick to judge Pope Francis. They call Pope Francis, accusing him of heresy and all these sorts of things. And
Sure.
I do admit that maybe their criticism is correct, but what a risky move. What a bold move, because what if you're wrong? What if you've judged his heart
Mm,
wrong? What if you've read the headlines and you didn't dig any deeper, and you're just spreading gossip and lies that are hateful
yeah.
and damaging to this person's character? So yeah, my approach maybe is a little bit more cautious than your approach. Maybe you're more out there and more vocal with your criticisms of your organization that you belong to, but I think you probably
Yeah.
do it out of love and care and concern for the people in that organization. So I don't judge you.
I hope so. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
no, that's fine. I mean, I appreciate that answer. It's funny to hear you say, like, I may not like your answer. Like,
yeah,
truthfully, like, I just like people who are willing to talk to me, and
yeah,
I appreciate your answer because, to be honest with you, I wish. Well, and let's just put it this way: I'm 45, right, and I've had questions my whole life, and for 42 or 43 of the years that I've been alive, I took the same tack that you took,
yeah,
which is it's better to be careful and not judge too quickly and judge unrighteously. Like you don't want to judge unrighteously, right?
yeah.
And then I got introduced into sort of this world of abuse inside of the LDS church, and all of a sudden something switched inside of me. Like when I started talking to victims and victims advocates, when I started working with abusers too, right? And hearing the pain in their lives and recognizing that there's a savior that wants to save both the abused and the abuser, right? All of a sudden, as I continued to pray about it, it just became impossible to stay silent. And I don't know a better way to say that. Like it, but it's simply, and then there's a little bit more to this story. Like, so, and I can't get too much into it. I have to be really careful about how I talk about this for victims and that kind of a thing. But I guess what I can say is, so inside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the spiritual body, we have another set of scripture called the Doctrine and Covenants that we believe is sort of the constitution for the modern church, right? Because we felt there was a need for a restoration. And so when the gospel was restored, we believe that God gave us a constitution through Joseph Smith, and we added that to our canon. And when how do I say, I got to be really careful about how I say this. When I first got involved with approaching the church about the problem of abuse, I was actually given access to an area authority, which is sort of, you talk about sort of your bishop and then your stake president. And then the level above that is where things that can't get solved locally get solved on the area level. And the only advice and counsel that this man gave me, and I think I could use his name because he's a public figure, his name was Michael Beheshti. And the only advice and counsel that he gave me was to study a very specific section of Doctrine and Covenants. And that section of Doctrine and Covenants talks very specifically about the imperative duty of the saints to gather up a record of all of the persecution and all of the things that had happened and to publicize it, really,
Uh,
right? And so I took that very seriously because in our church, we talk a lot about sustaining the brethren, right? So all of the leaders in our church are male. And so we talk about sustaining the brethren. And so when this good brother gave me this counsel, I took it very seriously. And I consider, now this is a point of disagreement between me and the church right now and the leaders of the church, because I view what I'm doing as meeting my imperative duty based on the counsel I received from a leader of the church. They view me as a rabble rouser and somebody who is wrongfully judging and spreading gossip and lies and rumor, I think. Well, I mean, and they've never accused me directly of that, although they have accused me of apostasy, which next Wednesday I'll likely be excommunicated for the church
wow.
for apostasy. And so, but they've never made really specific. They've leveled the sort of general claim of apostasy, and they've based it on a single letter that I wrote out of the hundreds of thousands of words that I've written to my stake president. That's their case. And so, but I don't have an answer here. I don't. I wish I had an answer whether what I was doing was the right thing and doing it the right way. I don't have an answer for that. All I know is that I'm doing the best I can with the information I was provided and the counsel that I was given by my church leaders, or a church leader who's no longer talking. So because he's been released from his calling in the church, and he won't respond to any of my inquiries anymore. So yeah. But I would just like, for anybody who ever watches this, I think it's really a critical question that we have to ask ourselves as members of a spiritual body. If we're not going to be naive, as you say, and we're going to acknowledge that there is, in our church, we call it the natural man, and there's a natural inclination to sin, we should expect to find that not just amongst the laity, but also amongst the hierarchy. And when we find it amongst the hierarchy, what is our duty as disciples of Jesus Christ in terms of holding the hierarchy accountable so that the spiritual body remains safe and that the spiritual body remains a place where people can come to worship and heal? I don't have a final answer for that, but it's something that I really would encourage people in whatever way that they worship to try to get in touch with whatever source they think is truth and discover what their duty is in terms of protecting the spiritual body from hierarchy that may fall out of line with doctrinal teachings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Go to the source, and I don't think that you or I are hoping to disconnect from the hierarchy, because there is a hierarchy, and I believe it's it's God given, and I believe that the Catholic Church is ordained, positively ordained. It's part of the economy of salvation, and I'm sure you believe the same. That it's not just some blob, some amorphous
Right.
blob of believers. Like I think that you probably
It was
believe,
established under
yeah,
proper authority is the
yeah,
way I would say it, right? And I
yeah,
know that that's a big thing between Catholics and Mormons is that you have a claim to authority
yeah,
through all the way back to Christ
yeah,
and Peter, and we have a claim to authority that starts later on because we believe there was an apostasy.
yeah,
But really, that's probably the first point of contact between Catholics and Mormons is this claim to authority. But
yeah.
we both believe that our respective churches have proper claim to authority, right?
Yeah, and I didn't mention, by the way, I didn't mention my friend Risto is here in the live chat. Hello to you and to Red Ends and to Pudis Bird and whoever else is watching. Nicola Krisick, hello to you. But my friend Risto is pointing out, that we have an obligation to clean the house. It's not just the hierarchy; it's people, at the bottom. And
Mm,
I didn't mention that, but there is a responsibility not only to strive to do good and to avoid evil on a personal level with the choices that we face all day, every day, these moral choices.
yeah,
There's power, and wherever there's power, there's a tendency to corruption. Even in the little guy's life, there is that, that tendency to selfishness. So yeah, I didn't mention
that's a
that, but
great
yeah,
point.
it's a
Yeah,
great point that we have to strive for holy personal holiness, and also we have to clean house, and we have an obligation to fraternal correction when it's appropriate, and it's not always appropriate. That's the thing. That's part of the reason where I don't criticize the hierarchy publicly. I might make a few snide comments here and there, but I'm not like naming names. I'm not naming names and stuff like that,
right,
because,
right.
and it might happen that I'll have a good reason to in the future. So I'm not saying that no one can ever name names, but what I'm saying is that
Sure.
there's this striving for personal, like I want to get to heaven. That's my number one priority. So I'm trying to
Yeah,
clean house internally, but
man.
there certainly is a responsibility we have to those other members of the church to not put our head in the sand and these sorts of things. If I could just ask you, I don't know how sensitive this topic is, but I have no idea what kind
Mhm.
of abuse you suffered. Was it sexual abuse as a child, or what was it?
Yeah, so I'm actually not able to discuss that at this particular moment in time, just due to some litigation that's presently going
Oh,
on.
okay.
And so I will say this, though. This is what I would like to say about that. One of the really strange things about being in the position that I'm in is that any abuse that I have suffered really pales in comparison to the abuse of the people that I work with. And so, like, I don't want anybody to believe for a second that I'm here because of the abuse that I have suffered.
Okay.
That is really not what it's about. I am a researcher. And
Oh,
the
okay.
reason that I'm here is that I was on a forum where people were making all kinds of insane, what I thought were insane claims about abuse inside of the church. And I am like, as a researcher, I'm highly attracted to highly controversial claims because they're easy to falsify or verify. And all I said on the forum was, look, if you will bring me some actual primary source evidence that there's a problem, I promise I will follow through until the day I die in terms of addressing this. And lo and behold, the things that seemed crazy turned out not to be crazy. And the more that I research, the more primary source documents I pull out that show me that there is a real problem with abuse inside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'd love to go through a little bit of that evidence with you and your audience if you're okay with
Yeah,
it
yeah,
for a
yeah. Of
second.
course, of
All
course.
right.
Yeah. Whatever you have to protect yourself and your friends, or whatever you want to call them, your fellow the
Sure.
victims, or whatever you have to protect them. But I'm sure you know how to navigate that.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the place I'd really like to start it with is there's a memorandum that was leaked from the church called the Pace Memorandum,
You may have
and
shared this with me on a DM. Is that the document you shared with me?
it may have been, yeah.
Okay.
I can't remember to be honest with
Okay.
you. So the Pace Memorandum is not just any memo, right? Internal corporate memo. This is the presiding bishop of the church coming to the leadership of the church saying, look, I'm spending time interviewing people who have been involved in ritual abuse. They're victims of ritual abuse. And he says, I've interviewed, I can't remember the number, I don't want to get it wrong, but it's something like around 60 or something like that. And he says, but it could be triple that or more if I didn't limit myself to the number of interviews I was doing so that I can get the rest of my job done, right? So this was leaked in around 1990-ish, something like that. And, you know, as a member of the spiritual body, I have some expectations about how I would like the corporation who's interfacing with civil society on my behalf to handle a memorandum like the one that Glenn L. Pace gave to the leadership. When you go back in history, what you find is that, at least to me, the response was unsatisfactory, right? Because what they did is they ran, so the Mormon church has a huge media empire and influence inside of mainstream media. And what they did is, instead of saying, oh, wow, Bishop Pace, this is crazy. Like, how are we going to help the people who've been ritually abused? What they did is they ran to the Chicago Tribune and they ran a story saying, while we know that there may be isolated incidences of blah, 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 PR, marketing, garbage, blah, 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 right? And they spiked the story, right? So to me, that makes me curious as a researcher. Why would an institution who claims to be representing, interfacing with civil society on behalf of a spiritual body, learn of ritual abuse inside of it, the buildings owned by the corporation and perpetrated by agents acting on behalf of the corporation and the spiritual body? Why would they take that and spike that? Why would they not work to help the people who had been ritually abused and maybe root out what was going on and try to cleanse the church of that kind of behavior, which you and I both know, we're not naive. You're never going to get abusers out of churches, because churches are places that abusers are attracted to for various reasons, right? So I'm not saying that we're ever going to have a church that's free of abuse. But when I see the corporation's response to claims from one of their own that ritual abuse is happening inside the church, and I see them spike a story, as a researcher, that makes me interested. And so I started doing more research, historical research based on primary source documents. And here are the kinds of things that we found in the last year. So way back in the 1900s, there was a fraternity called Skull and Bones. And they were, out at Yale University, and they liked San Francisco a lot, and they sort of needed a way station in between. And we found newspaper articles where you're never a former member of Skull and Bones, but members of Skull and Bones said, hey, a great place to set up shop would be Salt Lake City. And sure enough, within a couple of years, there's a chapter of Skull and Bones up at the University of Utah. Okay. At the same time, you have a man who became an apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by the name of John Whitsoe, who at the time was serving as the president of the University of Utah, who testifies in a book that he wrote that he overheard to what he called Gentiles, right? Because anyway, long story. But these are guys who were serving on the board of the University of Utah. And John Whitsoe says, it was shocking to overhear these two men claim that they were going to overthrow our university and then overthrow the state of Utah, right? So a lot of people like to throw around the word conspiracy theory, but what we have here is a true conspiracy being testified to by a man who was present, right? An eyewitness, or an ear witness, I guess, if you want to two men claiming that they were going to work to try to overthrow the University of Utah and the state of Utah. And the way they were going to do that was to dilute the belief of young Mormon men and women, right? And eventually put them into positions of power, influence, and gain. So as you trace that chronologically, what you see is that on the University of Utah campus, you see Skull and Bones and a fraternity called Sigma Chi gain tremendous influence. And when you start looking at Sigma Chi at the University of Utah, what you see is what appears to be a farm team for occult secret societies that feed up into organizations like Skull and Bones. And then interestingly, as you sort of build your network map, what you learn is that I got to be really careful about how I say this, because I tend to exaggerate a little bit. So everybody gets to go and fact check Justin after the show. But the general idea here is that there appears to have been an aristocracy that was developed utilizing the fraternity system at the University of Utah, and then taking those people and farming them out into the community and through the church hierarchy, right? And then at the same time, there's the corporation, the development of the corporation. right? And so what you end up with, it appears to me, based on the research that I've done, is that just like in Jesus's time, we have a very similar situation. Mormons, when they started the spiritual body and were trying to follow the law of God, were persecuted to the point where they had extermination orders put out against them by the governor of Missouri. So in order to flee, in order to get away from that, they fled out of the country, right? And so they went to now what's Utah, but at that time was called Deseret and was outside of the boundaries of the United States. Well, the United States needed more land and more resources, and Utah has a lot of resources, a lot of natural resources. And so eventually Utah came into contact with the United States government again, and really the spiritual body had a choice. It appeared, are we going to be exterminated for our beliefs and trying to follow God's law, which at that time included polygamy, which that's a whole nother ball of wax, right? Or are we going to assimilate with the state and survive? And what you see is that they made the choice to assimilate and survive. And the people who argued that that was a good idea are now the ones who are profiting, right? And are in positions of power, influence, and gain inside both the spiritual body and the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That pretty well helps me understand, well, there's a really big, important part of this that's really important and was pretty shocking when I learned it. So what you learn is that part of that assimilation was that it appears that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints made good friends with the military industrial complex of the United States of America. So for example, we found a document from 1984 where the CIA goes to meet with leaders of, I don't know if it's the corporation or the church, to be honest with you, but they're meeting with what they call leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the leaders of the church endorse the mission of the CIA. And I don't want to get too much into like what the mission of the CIA is. I think people are learning in 2024 a lot more about what that means. But for either the spiritual body or the corporation that's interfacing with civil society on behalf of the spiritual body to endorse the mission of an organization like the Central Intelligence Agency is highly problematic for me, but it does explain why they did with the Pace Memo what they did with the Pace Memo. So now I have an event, the spiking of the Pace Memo, but I also have an entire body of primary source documents that show and give a reasonable explanation for why these people are behaving the way that they're behaving. Now, the leaders of the corporation and the leaders of the spiritual body, I think, are pretty unhappy with the fact that we've uncovered a lot of these primary source documents. But I'm not sure that I really care all that much, because truth is truth. And when you find it in a primary source document, I think the world has the right to see that, right? I think I have the right to publish that. And I know maybe you consider it airing dirty laundry. I consider it unveiling truth.
Yeah, I mean, I have to, I have to qualify my statement, because from my Catholic perspective, I believe that the Catholic Church was built by Christ, who is the God man, fully God, fully man, and it's a different conception of God to begin with than the LDS conception of God, completely different. But from my perspective, God took on human flesh, suffered and died for us, built a church, and ordained, certain uh, salvation, economy of salvation, as we call it. And so that's why I'm very cautious to criticize the hierarchy, even though they're corrupt members in the hierarchy, always. But it's because there's a special status that the church has, and the vicar of Christ, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, he has a special office, and he himself is a human. I mean, he's a sinner. He's flawed, and he might be. As I always say to my friends who hate Pope Francis, well, he might be the Antichrist. I don't think he is. The church doesn't tell me that he is, but he might turn out to be. I don't
Right.
know. God only knows. I trust God and God alone. I don't trust any human. But the human who happens to be Pope, I believe that God ordained him, and only time will tell if he's a
Yeah.
good man. I can't judge the heart. So when it comes to airing the dirty laundry about the Scientologists, or about the Jehovah's Witnesses, or the LDS hierarchy, or whatever, yeah, I mean, I still think we have to respect the human beings that are involved, because we don't know the heart, and we have to be careful that we don't accuse someone falsely, for sure, and hurt someone's
Mm-hmm.
reputation. But that's more of a human thing that applies to everyone outside of the church and within the church. And there's a special concern that I have for my church, because I think that it is categorically different. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Sure.
Make that clear.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up this idea of trust in a leader, right? So because this is actually one of the things that's got me in a lot of trouble too. So right now, the so it's pretty important to understand that one of the things we found is that not only did Skull and Bones show up at the University of Utah, but the current man sitting as the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and who acts as the prophet, seer, and revelator for the spiritual body is a member of Skull and Bones.
Is he
Okay.
open about it? He's open about it?
Well, no. So there was a group of people who found an autobiography that he wrote. So I guess actually, let's be really careful about how we say this. He was open enough about it to write it in an autobiography that I don't think he ever thought would see the light of day necessarily in the public.
Oh.
But when he started rising through the ranks, somebody revealed that book, and we found out that he's a member of Skull and Bones and Sigma Chi. Now, I have major problems with this that people can go read about on my blog, because there's just some really pragmatic, practical problems with having people who made death oaths with people outside of your organization when you sit in a seat like I do on next Wednesday, where I'm going to be judged by another occult secret society member who also made death oaths with people that I don't know or trust, right? So my spiritual life is being judged by a man who made death oaths. Now, to his credit and to his favor, like in his favor, he made those oaths before he became a member of the church. And it's not his fault that the church has rewarded him and awarded him for his behavior and put him in positions of leadership. I'm not saying that that's a problem, him specifically, but pragmatically, there are problems with being a member of a church who's led by men who made death oaths with each other to protect each other, even above those of us in the spiritual body. That's just a pragmatic problem that needs to be addressed at some point, probably, unless nobody cares, in which case we'll get what we deserve, right? So, but when you talk about trusting leadership, one of the things that this Skull and Bones prophet is out saying to the people is there are 15 men on the face of this earth that you can trust completely. Now, I read my scriptures and I love my scriptures. I consider my scriptures the standard of truth. In fact, we call them the standard works. And the reason we call them the standard work is that we're supposed to compare everything that we learn or that we're told to that standard. And if it comes into contact and there's a dispute, we are to follow the standard works and not any man, no matter what title or position he holds. And in my standard works, in Mark 9:44, in the version that I read, which is a little bit different than anybody else is going to read because it's the Joseph Smith translation of that, it tells me very specifically not to trust any other man, but to work out my own salvation. So if I have a Skull and Bones prophet telling me that there are 15 men I can trust completely, but my standard works are telling me not to trust any man, it's a very easy choice for me, but it puts me into direct conflict with the man that I've been taught since I was literally could understand anything, that I'm supposed to follow the prophet, right? We have a little song in the church that sounds awfully propaganda-ish. Follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, he knows the way. And we stand our kids up and we all march to it. And it's, but I have a direct conflict right now because my prophet, who has made death oaths with groups of people that I don't feel comfortable with, is telling me that I can trust him completely, while my standard works are telling me not to do that. And I guess if I have to choose between my Skull and Bones prophet and my standard works, for me, that's an easy decision. For a lot of people, apparently it's difficult, but for me, it's not.
I agree with you. We have to have principles, like no matter what religion or worldview you adhere to, you have to have principles and you have to have something that you stand for. And I agree. That particular principle, I agree with. It's a Catholic principle. We trust God and God alone. And like I said, you and I disagree about the definition of God. But you know, I can't know the heart of any
I don't know how to
LDS either.
define God. I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah,
Maybe you know how to define God.
yeah,
Like I like what you said in some other episodes. Like there are things that we're never going to know, and to
yeah,
me, the nature of God is a mystery
yeah,
that I'm going to have to wait to have Him uncover for me.
yeah, yeah,
So, like, I have some conceptions about what God might be and what He might be like, but I think
yeah.
it would be really incorrect of me to sit here and pretend that I understand the nature of God.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And not everyone has sort of examined obsessively sort of the metaphysics behind classical theism. So I can't judge any member of LDS and look down my nose at them because their metaphysics is wrong. Although I'm tempted to do that. That's just sort of arrogance and pride, because I have looked into it
Sure.
and I whatever. But yeah, so I'm very much aware, as my friend Risto in the live chat often reminds me, that LDS people or Mormons, whatever they're called, they're good people. They do believe in God, and they don't know the things that I know about philosophy and metaphysics. So
Sure.
they're not buying into what I object to. Actually, they're actually good people, and they follow the
Sure.
scriptures and Jesus, and even though they might fail a philosophy test, but getting into heaven is not, it's not about a theology test or a philosophy test to get into heaven. It's about
Yeah.
loving and being good and
Well,
living
yeah.
according to your lights. So
I do love that about Catholicism. I have to acknowledge that, like, there's a part of me that's highly attracted to Catholicism in the sense that there is a rigor to the theology
yeah,
in Catholicism that Mormonism is a very practical religion. It was
yeah,
born out of practical necessity, right? Like, they started a church, they tried to follow the law, people were trying to kill them. Like, sitting around and talking about like how many angels can dance on the top of a pin is not what you're going to be doing when you have an extermination order out against you and a mob is coming to tar and feather you, right? And so the historical reality of what the church is sort of has not, like, there have been some people inside of our church. Orson Pratt is a good example, BH Roberts is another good example, who've tried to establish sort of a Mormon theology. you know um, I would say that we've not done a great job of that. In fact, I would say that, like, one of the defining characteristics of Mormons in general is an inability to think logically and be reasonable about their beliefs.
yeah,
It's really very, very dogmatic at this point, in terms of just like I had an experience that made me feel something, and so it must be true. And that could be just about anything. And you're not going to find yourself in a whole lot of trouble unless it's going to harm somebody else or harm yourself. But outside of that, it's a pretty big mixing pot at this point in the church's history.
yeah.
You
I
know,
want to ask you about the excommunication. That is very dramatic. I mean, I don't care what group you belong to, being formally tried and condemned and excluded. It's horrible. It's one of the worst things. Not to add salt to the wound, but I mean, it's just like,
if I start crying in the middle of the podcast,
yeah, it's just horrible. It's just horrible. I feel bad for you. But the question I'm getting from the live chat is, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? Like my intuition tells me, are you just going to remain true to the texts and your the foundations of your worldview? That's what I think you're going to do. I don't think you're going to go church shopping. But
yeah,
just answer the question. What are you going to do if you do get excommunicated? And it sounds like, I mean, my other intuition, it sounds like you are going to get excommunicated. The way you've painted the
yeah.
picture, like,
Yeah. No, I think it's. I mean, it's not a predetermined conclusion in the sense that, like, we know what's going to happen. None of us are fortune tellers. But the handbook that my stake president is using to excommunicate me clearly states that the only reason that we're having this is that it's likely that I will be excommunicated. The only
uh,
reason that he would call the
uh,
membership council is if I'm likely to be excommunicated.
yeah,
And so I think we can say fairly that there's the probability of me being a member of the spiritual body known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as of February 1st is very low, right? But I believe in a God of miracles, and who knows? We'll find out what happens here. So to answer the question, I don't know what I'm going to do necessarily. I personally um, have a really firm belief that my church was founded under proper authority, and that the Constitution, as revealed to us by God, is in effect, and that those who are operating underneath that Constitution have the protection of God. My excommunication, and this is not going to be a very popular opinion for anybody who's LDS that watches this, but I'll simply lay it out this way because I just want to try to stay as factual as I can. So my excommunication trial is not being um, undertaken under the constitution of the spiritual body known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So my stake president is on the record in an email stating that the only document that's governing my trial is the Handbook of Instructions, which is a corporate document made by the corporation in order to give leaders of the spiritual body some help and assistance in terms of how to conduct the business of the church. But even the handbook itself doesn't claim to be doctrine or canon or anything of the sort. So one of the really interesting things that I uncovered and discovered throughout this process is that the definition of apostasy inside of the handbook has nothing to do with the definition of apostasy as it's been known for millennia amongst all religious people ever. And I would actually think this is actually kind of a fun exercise. If I were to ask you, David, what apostasy is, what's your understanding of what apostasy is?
It's a complete abandonment of the faith, like so it's
Yeah.
like you reject it. But I don't see you as someone that rejects your Mormon faith.
No,
So you're
at
not an
all.
apostate from
So
that perspective, I would say.
yeah, so but what happened is the corporation who is interfacing with civil society on behalf of the spiritual body of which I'm a voluntarily affiliated member has changed the definition of apostasy inside of the handbook that's governing my excommunication trial. And really, it's more about insubordination because
Uh,
really they're just upset that I'm talking about their leaders,
uh,
right? But they have equated what you have correctly identified as apostasy with insubordination inside of the corporate policies and procedures manual. And I'm going to be jettisoned from the spiritual body based on a definition provided by a corporation. My response to that is really simple. And this is a good opportunity for me to go on the record. If the corporation that interfaces with the civil society would like to kick me out of the spiritual body based on a rested definition of apostasy, by all means, it's their building, they own it, right? Like they have many rights and responsibilities as a corporation. And if they would like to use a false definition of apostasy to separate me from the spiritual body of Christ, by all means. But they ought to know that in the constitution of our church, they will be held accountable for their decisions, right? And the actions that they take against a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints spiritual body, not corporation. I am more than happy to let anybody in the world know that I am in open rebellion against the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I find their behavior reprehensible. And I would really like the spiritual body to have a conversation about why we're being led and who we're being led by. So if you want to get me for insubordination against the corporation, by all means. But if you choose to separate me from the body of Christ due to a rested definition of apostasy, you also have the right to do that. But there's going to be some consequences later down the road. And that's not a threat. That's just a statement of fact, right? Like every religion believes that when you make decisions, there are consequences for your choices. And so all I've asked my leaders is to be very cautious about how they proceed because I love them. And I don't want them to have uncomfortable conversations with our Savior when he says, why did you use a definition of apostasy that has nothing to do with what I defined apostasy as? But I can't control what they do, nor when they do it. And so I will accept the decision that they make. And then I'll have to sort out where I'm going to fall in. But I'll probably, for the foreseeable future, I will be a visitor at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints every Sunday at the same congregation that I have been, unless they get the lawyers to write a letter that says I can't go on their property because they're a corporation that has the right to own property. And if they want to get their lawyers to say that I can't go on their property, they're more than, well, they're going to have a little bit of a problem with that because I whistle blew on them because the law firm that represents the church took $5 million of PPP loans during COVID, claiming that they needed it to keep the doors open for payroll. And I'm just pretty sure they didn't need that $5 million to keep their doors open for payroll. And so they may have a problem trying to sue me because I'm a whistleblower against their firm. But I'm sure the church has other law firms that they can utilize to keep me off their property. And if they want to go down that path, then I will honor, like I actually believe the articles of faith. And when we say that we honor, obey, and sustain the law, if a judge tells me that I can't go on any property owned by the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I will honor that. So, and then like, and you know, you talk about church shopping. I don't know, like hit me up. I'm like, I love talking to people about their beliefs. And like, I personally believe for reasons that are far beyond anything we can talk about today here on this podcast, that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's what it's known by now. It's not even what it was known by when it was brought into existence. But that church, I truly believe was founded by God and is under God's protection if we'll follow God. So like I'm going to try to stick that out as long as I can because that's where I feel like my protection is. If somebody can convince me otherwise, what I really want most of all is to have God's protection because we live in a world in which we need it.
yeah, I agree with you. I can sympathize with you a lot. Differences aside in terms of worldview or affiliation with the church. But yeah, I mean, there are saints. There are great saints. One of my favorite saints is Saint Joan of Arc. I'm sure you've heard about her. She's very popular in the culture, movies, and books, and so on and so forth. And she
Sure.
was falsely accused, tried, wrongly convicted, and burned at the stake, no less. And then 25 years later, that decision was revisited, and they overturned the
Yeah.
decision. Okay, but this is the church that I belong to. Okay, so she knew what was up. She was a saint. She knew her priorities, right? And she could have
Yeah.
caved. She could have bent her principles in order to avoid death. She could have done that. It's easy, right? It's very easy
Oh,
to
sure, sure.
compromise, but she did not compromise, and she was vindicated in the end. She's held up by the same church that persecuted her. And when I say church, I'm equivocating. I'm using the word two different ways. The church that holds her up is the good church, and the church
Right.
that persecuted her and tried her and killed her was just corrupt members of the church. So I use the same word
Yeah.
for the two. But you have a
Yeah.
slightly different way of approaching things. You can talk about the spiritual LDS and then the corporate LDS, and you've got a very clear way of distinguishing it. But for me, it's just like the church, the good part of the church, the bad part of the church, the weeds among the wheat, and the wolves in sheep's clothing. It's all very messy.
Yeah.
But it's the same
One of
idea.
the
It's the
things I
same
thought,
idea. Some people
yeah,
are worldly. Some people are worldly, and some people are spiritual. And those who are spiritual also are fully material. They have a body and a soul. So it's not like
yeah,
purely spiritual. The spiritual ones, the saints, they had a body. They respected the material nature of creation. These sorts of things. But there are some people who are sold out to the material, sold out to Satan, and they just want to be worldly in that way.
yeah.
So.
Well, and look, I mean, I don't. One of the things that I found that's really interesting is that my church's corporate structure is based off of Catholicism. So when the
Ah.
church went out looking for a way to protect itself from the civil society,
Ah.
what they landed on was the corporate soul.
Ah.
And the corporate soul is based on Catholic corporation, right?
Ah.
And so, like, there's not a lot of, like, when you actually get to it, which is why maybe our Pope or your Pope and my prophet got to meet this last year
Oh, no
and
way.
seemed to get along pretty well. Yeah. Yeah. So that's funny
Oh.
because every Mormon knows this happened, but no Catholics do because Catholics don't care.
Yeah. What's
But
his name? What's the name of the prophet?
Russell M. Nelson.
Russell Elna. That's the same guy that you've
Yeah,
been sort of.
Russell.
That's the same guy that you've been
Yeah.
saying
So
is Skull and Bones.
he's a member of Skull and Bones and Sigma Chi from the University of Utah. That's correct. And
And
he
he
met
hasn't
up.
renounced
So
that. He hasn't renounced that. And he's in it. Is he able to renounce
mm-mm.
that? Is he able if he wanted to?
No, you're not. So if you go and look at the terms and conditions page of Sigma Chi, what you'll learn is that when you make your death oath, you give away your agency. And they can terminate the relationship with you, but you cannot terminate the relationship with them. That's what you sign up for. Yeah, it's a little bit problematic. Now, if there was a Mormon here who wanted to get after Catholics a little bit, they would, like, I've heard this from several people of like, well, there's a Jesuit Pope, and I don't even know what that means, but apparently it's a thing,
Yeah.
right? So all I know is that in my church we have a Skull and Bones prophet. In your church you have a Jesuit Pope, and there are people who are upset about it, right?
Yeah. Just so you know, there are many conspiracy theories about the Jesuits, and it's a reality, sadly, that many of the Jesuits have gone astray and they're worldly and satanic, whatever. But the
Sure.
founder of this religious order, the Jesuit is just short for the Society of Jesus. That's what Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who was a good Spanish saint, he founded
Yeah.
this order. He's a very good and holy saint. He's up in heaven, his soul, and he'll be reunited with his body on Judgment Day. But in any case, the Jesuit order is good, but it's corrupt, like every other order. Okay, so they
Yeah.
had a lot of power. They had a lot of power, and power corrupts. And
Yeah. I mean, it's funny
not all of
because
them are corrupt, but all of the Skull and
yeah,
Bones people are corrupt because by definition, like.
it's yeah, but you know what's so funny about that, David, is that so I had the opportunity to talk to a guy on Twitter who's from a family that's highly involved in Skull and Bones. And what he tried to convince me is that Skull and Bones at the University of Utah is an academic honors society that is an order that's based on good things. So it's like, and I'm not here to criticize Jesuits. I don't know anything about Jesuits. I'm not going to say anything about that. But it's interesting to me that the framework of the conversation is the same, that the people who are wrapped up in it, of course, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to join an order that represents death, destruction, and chaos and anarchy. And like they think even like there's a new cartoon on Amazon, right? And the whole cartoon is based on the premise that Lucifer is the victim, right? It's left-hand path philosophy. And but they don't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm joining sides with the bad guy. They wake up in the morning convinced that Lucifer has been victimized by Jehovah, who's tricked the whole world into thinking that he's a god. But look at all the pain and suffering, and like, who's going to follow that god? So maybe we should follow Lucifer. I guess my overall point here is that we should have a lot of grace and mercy towards each other in terms of what we believe, because we all believe crazy crap, right? And but where it became a problem for me is when they become victims of abuse. We're no longer talking about situations in which your crazy beliefs have no impact on me, the ones I love, or the ones I care for. And so when your crazy beliefs intersect with the well-being of people that I love and care for, I no longer have a choice but to activate and use my voice and use my agency to use my voice to try to make it better for those who are being harmed. Because look, I'm not a theologian, but all I know is that as a human being, inside of my spiritual body, and I don't mean my spiritual body, but I mean the spiritual body that I voluntarily affiliate with, the one thing that I want from that spiritual body is a place of safety. And if I'm an abuse victim and I can't go to that place that's a spiritual body of congregants who voluntarily associate with each other and have it be a safe place, then there's really no reason to have a church at all, in my opinion. And when I find that there are people who can't feel safe inside of this, I feel a duty to try to create an environment in which victims of abuse can show up knowing that it will be a place of hope and healing and worship of the one God, the one true God, who can provide that hope and healing that no mortal person can ever while we're here. Right now, my church is not that. And so I'm going to fight until they kick me out or until we do better. Now, I want to just say one more thing. There are good things happening because this week, one of our apostles, the newest apostle of our church, came out and in the AP news service gave an interview and acknowledged openly that our church has not done a good job, or that's not how he said it. So people have to go read the story. It's Patrick Kieran, Kearon. But he acknowledges that the church needs to do a better job of making sure that sexual abuse victims, he's very specific for some reason, which I don't understand, but sexual abuse victims need to be treated differently and in a better way by the spiritual body known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I'm hopeful that the work that I've done and the work that other people inside of the space who've been far more effective than me, right? There's also a bill in the Utah legislature right now that's going to define ritual abuse and criminalize it. So I'm hopeful that those who are paying attention inside the corporation and then those inside the spiritual body are beginning to see that this is not acceptable. For a spiritual body to be an unsafe place for a victim of abuse is not acceptable. It's intolerable. Because definitionally, the church needs to be a safe place for victims of abuse because in one sense, we're all victims of abuse. Self-abuse, abuse of others, being abused, right? And the place that we go to heal from that is our spiritual body that we choose to voluntarily affiliate with. But if the church isn't fulfilling that purpose, there's no purpose for a church, as far as I can tell.
Absolutely. I hope you'll come back. I do have to run. My wife came home and I've got to go feed her. But I hope you come back and come back soon because I want to. Not that I'm just like into gossip and following the drama, but I kind of wondering what's going to happen. I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen. I'm a little bit worried about you too. I'll be praying for you. I hope you pray for me and mine, and we'll see each other.
Absolutely.
We'll see each other on Twitter. But thank you so much, and God bless you and protect you, and may we all end up together happy in heaven one day. I know you and I have different conceptions of heaven, but the true heaven.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. So hope to talk to you again soon, my brother.
Thank you.
All right. God bless you. Take good care, and we'll talk soon.
All right. God bless.
Bye-bye.